Hey everybody, this is Mike. This is a very casual PowerPoint presentation that will help you with the project we're working on for the next 2 weeks. The project is titled Memento, Layering Marks and Erasers to Create Visual Histories. Essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to be accumulating lots of experimental marks and using our erasers and sandpaper in bold ways that remove some of those but leave traces and remnants of earlier states. And ultimately what we're doing is we're going to be creating images that have clear histories. You know, the process that they were made is revealed in little stages. So we can look at this image in the PowerPoint presentation here, this first image, which is by Richie Scotland. It's a photo of an aged wall that itself reveals bits and clues about its life stages as an object. You can see that above the window right here is a place where the plaster has crumbled and fallen away, and what we have showing through that we're able to peer inside and see is a stone wall that was there even earlier. Other places in this image you can see, like for example around the window, somebody at some point came in and repaired where the plaster in the wall might have been crumbling, and they used a new grayer plaster or cement. And you know, if you keep looking around the wall, you see other traces and bits of its history. So for example, this yellow speckle that we see here, it looks to be maybe an old coat of paint that's just really worn and faded and flaked off over the years, possibly because of the fact that it's an outdoor wall and it's been exposed to the sun and the rain and other kinds of elements. So its most current stage, this wall's stage anyway, is it's showcasing some really cool flashy green mold which again, like I said, is sort of like the present right now. So an important thing for you to understand is that a lot of people see these features as defects, but you should know that they oftentimes layer in ways that add richness, complexity, and character to the object, which might be less interesting in a polished or brand new state. So, you know, like you look at an old thing like this wall, and it's like you can get lost at looking at all the little bits and pieces and things that have accumulated over time. So interior designers know this. A lot of times they go out and they find old distressed hardwood floor that they then install in like new apartments. So unlike brand new wood, which is usually perfectly milled and polished, the distressed wood comes with dents and dings and stains, things that had accumulated from years of use. The imperfections are really beautiful, and they have a richness and character that provide traces of that object's unique history. So, in fact, distressed wood has become so popular it's hard to get sometimes, and so a lot of people will buy fake versions. There are basically companies that fabricate new wood to look as if it's old, which is kind of an interesting thing. So, our second image here is by Deborah Jane Seltzer. So, it's a motel sign. There's a real beautiful quality to the surface of the sign that's caused by basically an abundance of rust that would have developed over a long period of time due to rain, no doubt. And you can see trails of rust underneath these letters. Again, imagine that the water is coming down and forcing bits and pieces of the letters to trickle down the sign. So the most important thing that I want you to know about this is that sometimes it takes time and energy for things to become interesting, and sometimes it's accidental too, which you should always feel comfortable letting go a little bit of the control of your images. So and an example of like what I mean about it taking time for things to become interesting is this. I could make an analogy with cooking. So you can't just cut up carrots and potatoes and celery and throw them in a pot of water and call them stew. The ingredients really have to be heated, and they have to be heated over a longer period of time before those bits and parts break down and layer in interesting ways. So drawings and paintings are like this too. The more time we throw at them, the more we let them develop marks and erasures and things like that, the more interesting and complex they become. So a cool aspect about our process is that we can build and erode our images in ways that yield random and unexpected outcomes. So we should embrace that. Think of yourself as being in dialogue with your drawing, where you and the drawing both have something to say about where this work goes. So don't be afraid to let it take the lead. So this third image I have here is by It's by Robert Rauschenberg. It's titled Erase de Kooning. It's a really very interesting piece. So at one point there's this very young artist named Robert Rauschenberg who was trying to make a name for himself. He had a really cool idea. He needed a famous artist to give him a drawing, and then he would erase it vigorously to remove the image. And so in order for his concept to work, he really needed a good drawing from a kind of famous artist. So he approached William de Kooning, who at the time was like maybe the largest figure in painting in that era. But de Kooning gave him a drawing, and you can see here, this is the actual erased de Kooning drawing, which is interesting. And the reason I put this image in here is, first of all, just to be a little goofy, because it's kind of a far out idea, right? But also because of the fact that like now we don't know what the drawing was, and so there's this curiosity. All we have are these little bits and traces that we see here of what the original de Kooning drawing looked like, and so erasing and degrading and eroding things like this can sometimes make the subjects that we're drawing a lot more mysterious and interesting. So anyway, that's something that you guys can think about too. So instead of just giving everybody everything, pulling back and wiping something away or erasing something might be more intriguing in the end for the viewer. So one of the big parts of our project for the next 2 weeks is to use marks in ways, and erasures, in ways that layer and accumulate. And so this is a huge piece by a famous artist in the contemporary art world right now named Julie Marutu. She's really amazing. She has lots of different kind of things, but a lot of times she'll use architectural bits and pieces. You can kind of, if you look carefully on the very first layer of her work, there's this very fine ink drawing of architecture. And she's been known to go into and use photography from places like Baghdad, places that maybe suffered war, and she uses those bits and pieces of history as ways to make larger works like this. So anyway, the thing that I really like about her work is that it's pretty clear that you can see that she's got different layers happening at once. So we've got this very fine ink drawing of perspective lines. Can you see them back there? And then there are these smudged marks. She's gone back on top of those, and she's putting dabs of marks with a pen, and then she's in some cases even just wiping them away with her thumb. So you get these very hazy, smudgy areas like this. And then what she does is she isolates each layer with a lot of times a coat of something. Like maybe it's a clear spray of some sort, like not like an acrylic paint, but something similar. And then you can see these final coats where she's got these beautiful, clean strips of paint that are floating closer to the viewer on the very top of this piece. So, but again, what I really like is that there's this almost illusion of space between the layers even, and there's a sense of like the way this piece evolved from the background to the middle ground to the foreground, and there's an implication of history with that. So that's something that we want to think about in our works. So here's another Julie Marutu, and the same thing you can see underneath. I wonder if this one's upside down. But anyway, you can see that there's this very faint architectural line work underneath the drawing, and then on top are ink smudges and more I guess they're more experimental marks on top. So, but again, layering is really, really wonderful. Here's again some of those very clean, like strip-like marks that she's putting on top. So, but the layering is really, really important for our project right now. So a really popular artist in the sort of contemporary realist movement right now is an artist named Zoe Frank. She's just an incredible painter. And, these are maybe a little bit of a stretch, but I wanted to put them in here anyway because I like how she uses, this is called a scumble, where a painter uses a semi-transparent paint. So it's not totally transparent like jelly. It's a little bit more like milk that's been watered down, where there's still a little bit of opacity, but not so much that you can't see through it anymore. And so there's these translucent passages where she probably painted this entire tree and even these tiles, and then in a later stage came back with a passing of this milky white paint that was somewhat watered down, and or she wiped it down so that it was just, there's just a little bit of it left. But what you get basically is this really cool illusion of space. These feel like they're further away. These feel closer to us. But also, there's, again, I think this sense of history. Like, you can't cover something up like in reverse time, right? Like, so something has to exist first, and then the cover-up happens after that. So again, there's like this stage 1 and then stage 2. And I think that's really, really fascinating because, again, it gives just little clues. It just creates a little sense of, like, a passage of time. So the artist is making it in time, which is what we want to focus on. So, but really beautiful painting by Zoe Frank. Here's another one of hers. And these are actually quite timid for her. You should look her up. She's something to behold. Her works are incredible. But she's got these very big, monumental paintings even of multiple figures and heroic poses and things like that. And they're just really, really gorgeous. She's incredible. So I picked this particular image here because I like how, first of all, she leaves like some of the roughness. Notice how she probably sanded down or used a paint that wasn't too thick. Can you see how you can see through the desk here in this area? You can see back through it. So something happened where it's been eroded or it wasn't quite thick enough to cover in the first place. But again, we get this sense of layering that's happening. You can get a little bit of it here too. It almost looks like she might have sanded or wiped away wet paint in this area, which reveals maybe the underpainting that was there first. Here's another really great place where she's using layering. So there was at some point something white back here, and she has gone ahead and painted, of course it was purple around that white thing too, but then she's gone ahead and she's painted a pattern motif, this wallpaper, that's going right over that white thing. And so there's this spatial confusion here. We're not quite sure, but we can definitely tell that this mustardy greenish yellow pattern is on top of the white, which again is what we're looking for. Here's another nice area. Look at how that blue letter or piece of paper is disrupted. You can almost see through it, right? Well, I want you guys to really experiment with your marks too. So there's going to be places where you're drawing lines that are very clear and pristine, and then I'm going to have you erode them away so they maybe exist in some areas more cleanly. In other areas, they sort of are rubbed away, and then we can see through them again. Not too unlike this. So, all right, this one's definitely a stretch, but I think it's got a really cool visual parallel to what we're doing. So, Idris Khan is a contemporary artist too. He's actually doing a riff off of some photography that was done by a guy named Bernd and Hilla Becher, and they had a whole series of Americana photography. I think it was Americana, but they went through the countryside and they took pictures of like all the water towers and all the oil towers, and so there are these huge collections of like dozens of these images and how similar they all look, these modern structures, and Idris Khan has come along and he's taken all those pictures and he has literally layered them together in a digital way, like Photoshop. And so there might be dozens of water towers from that series of photography from the Becher series that he's putting them all one on top of the other and probably adjusting their translucency so you can see through them a little bit. And so you get little senses of, do you see underneath? Right above the white, there's like a little faint ghost-like structure. And you can even see around this water tower how disrupted everything looks. Well, this kind of appearance, the layering that we're seeing here and how disrupted some of the line work is, as if like it's almost been eroded, this is very similar to what your drawings can look like too. And you can see it in this water tower also, or I should say this oil tower. You get the sense of like repetition of marks where, in your case, it might be that you'll see, but we're going to make a drawing and then we're going to erase it down and then we're going to draw it again, and there's going to be echo lines. Like you're going to have remnants from things that were erased the first time, and then you draw again on top, and sometimes it won't be exactly the same location for that line, and so you'll get vibrations and things like this, which are, I think, really, really gorgeous and beautiful, and they make interesting textures and effects. So, Idris Khan has done lots of images like this, and here's an example where he's gone out and collected maybe like dozens or hundreds of images of like London, and particularly the Houses of Parliament and Old Ben, right, Big Ben. And so you can see how he's taken all those images and he's layered them together. And there's some passages here, some quotes that you can read about what he gets out of that. But the cool thing is just that sense of layering in space and time. So like there are things that are further back. Look at that almost reversed. The contrast is reversed here, right? So there's like the Houses of Parliament that's lighter than the background, whereas in a lot of the other places the subject is darker than the background. So. But and these beautiful textures that you get in here with the bridges and things like that. So, speaking of marks, this is Jenny Grayson, one of my favorite artists. This is actually quite a big piece. It's probably like over 6 feet tall, I think, from one of the pictures I saw of it in a gallery. But anyway, Jenny Grayson basically is a Melbourne artist who uses marks in really fun ways, where she's accumulating and mapping things. Probably not too unlike what we've been doing in our review so far, where it looks very much like she's mapping and measuring and figuring out where points are in space. So, but she accumulates her marks in ways that are I think really fascinating and interesting. They suggest some very basic things like mass and volume. So if you look over here, we can get a sense that there's a accumulation of stuff in the room back here, and also over here and in the front. Some important things I want you to notice about her work. The first is that there's a bit of a calligraphic way that she uses the mark. You know, when you think about the way that people use calligraphy with a pen, where there's these flamboyant, thick to thin lines and very decorative kinds of gestural marks. Well, you know, drawers do the same thing a lot of times, and she, in particular, I see that. So you can kind of see how she alters the pressure of a mark to go from dark to light, where she gives an accent and a darker point in some places but not in others. Look at how faint and light some of these marks are. A second important characteristic I want you to know about her style is that she leaves quite a bit to the imagination. Many of the objects in this drawing are formed almost entirely perceptually by the viewer, rather than literally. And what I mean is that Jenny Grayson doesn't draw every outline around each subject in this picture. Instead, she draws little bits here and there, which our mind stitches together to form the perception of the thing. For example, the ladder over here. So we might have just enough information to see the top of the ladder, and there's a leg and another leg, and this leg is maybe partially drawn, and we don't really exactly see where the rungs are that you would step on. But there's enough bits and parts that when we just glance at it, our mind can stitch it together and get a sense of what the thing is. So I a lot of times think that's a superior way of drawing. Sometimes if you're too literal and you're spoon-feeding people everything, it just doesn't leave anything to the imagination. It doesn't let the viewer sort of like, I don't know, they don't have as much freedom to sort of like look into the picture in ways that are appealing to them. So another thing about this more perceptual mechanism that she's using is that in some places it's very vague, like the back here. We can maybe get a sense that there might be an easel or something back there in a tabletop, but we really don't see much more than that. But she has very successfully created a convincing sense of mass and location in the room. So that's a pretty cool trick. So we get a sense of like where things are in the room and about how big they are, and they do their part. Like they make us feel like the room has dimension and is believable. But at the same time, she's withholding very specific information, so we can't always tell like what exactly is on top of that desk, or what is that I'm looking at back there. So very cool. Here's another one by Jenny Grayson, one of my favorites because it has dogs. So this is Bat and Muttley. So there's two dogs. Here's the first little bitty dog, and then there's a big, darker dog in the foreground. So the reason I wanted to show you this image, well, I guess there's lots of reasons, but the first one is I was mentioning how calligraphic her marks are. And so here's a great area for you to look at for that. Notice how the mark, just this single line itself, changes its characteristic from dark to light. And so it's almost as if she's pressing harder in the beginning and lightening up as she makes the line more vertical, or not vertical, but towards the top of the piece. So I also like how she just embraces the sort of random stuff that's there. Like she drew on a piece of paper that had like a number, right? That's very, very cool. And finally, this dog in particular is a great example of that perceptual mechanism I was mentioning earlier. So look at how cute his little face is, and there's a nose, right here, and there's like a sort of line that expresses the jaw, the snoot on this bottom side of his face. The top side, though, you notice there isn't a line for that here. So we don't have every single line to define the dog's face, but we still have some sense of, there's enough clues for us to piece it together in our head. And similarly, like you can see, there's just sort of like gestural lines for maybe the legs are, like maybe the back leg. This is probably a back paw right here, and this is probably the front paw, because that's the way my dog always lays too. So, but anyway, it's very beautiful. She's got a wide range of kinds of quality of her marks. So you can see how she's using the eraser here. She's using it light in some places, more scribbly in some places. She smudges in some places. She leaves it very clean and clear in other places, which a lot of times brings those more clear, thin lines. They jet forward to the foreground. It's almost like it's a drawing made of wire, right? Like there's some wire that's further back and some wire that's closer. And so those are things that you guys can think about too. So now to our project. This is what the class is doing for the next 2 weeks at least. We are making skull drawings, and inside our classroom there's a big orange cabinet with glass doors that you can see through, and inside the glass doors are a collection of skulls. And so we are going to be using the skulls from different animals. Like we have cow skulls and horse skulls and a pig skull, and I think there's even a ram skull in there. And I'm going to set them up in different places in the room, and 2, maybe 3 people are going to sit around each of those still lifes in ways that are still responsible and socially distanced. And then we're going to spend at least 2 hours mapping out the different shapes and proportions of that skull onto our page. And I'm giving you a very special piece of paper. And this student of mine, this former student of mine here, is using it. And you can see how thick it is. It's called Arch's Cover. It's the sheet that she's drawing on. It's going to be the same as that you guys get. It's probably about a $4 piece of paper, just this one piece of paper. And the reason it's so expensive is because it's really good paper, and it's so thick that we can really beat it up. We can get in there and we can scratch it and we can scrape it and we can erase it and we can even sandpaper it down and not worry so much about the paper being so damaged that it doesn't hold the drawing anymore. So it doesn't rip that easily. It's a really great paper to work on. So, and what we're going to do is we're going to draw for 2 hours, and we're going to be very meticulous about mapping things out. And we're going to try and play around with marks a little bit, and then at the end of our 2-hour session, we're going to spend about, 15 or 20 minutes using an eraser that I give you and some sandpaper, and we are going to erase that sucker off the page. About 70% of the drawing should come off the page so that you leave just a ghost of what was there before. In some places you might erase all the way down to the clean white paper, and other places maybe you'll leave, sorry about that. In other places you might just leave little bits and pieces of what was there. So, and then of course the next day we come back, we're going to draw for another 2 hours, and we'll draw right on top of what we just erased the previous session. And then we're going to again experiment with marks and play around with the erasers. And if you look at this particular student's work, you can kind of see how she's using the eraser to make like white lines, not too unlike Jenny Grayson's. And you can also see like remnants of like, this was probably a very dark black line at one point, and she erased it down to kind of a gray. And so we get these like really cool spaces. Like there's a dark black line here for today's session. This might have been last session that she erased down. And there's this illusion of space and also an illusion of time, right? Because this came first and that came second. So, and at the end of our second day of drawing, we're going to again erase down again, but this time maybe only 30 or 40% of the drawing, and we're going to purposely leave some of the marks, but we're just going to make them more faint and ghost-like. And something that's really cool is that you'll start to, I hope at least, appreciate how the erasure can affect and change the way those marks look, and oftentimes they're more interesting after you've eroded them down a little bit. And you have to just open yourself up to the idea that marks can be experimental and you don't have to be able to control them completely, but maybe you can stumble your way into finding a cool way to make marks, which is partly what this project is about. So here is another example of this project from another class. So this one I think was from Bridget Riley. Shelby Riley, sorry. Bridget Riley's a famous artist. And so But you can see how she drew the skull and she erased it down so many times. She's a really good drawer, and she could draw it and erase it and draw it and erase it just in a matter of half an hour each time. But what she really got excited about, and that I was also excited about, was that in the erasing process, she was so aggressive and experimental that she was trying to see how she could make unique ways to erode the image down. And at one point, I think she was taking her fingers or something like that, and she was wiping the paper down with water in just a few places, like these places where it's white. And then she would let it sit for just a minute so that it wasn't wet, but it was a little bit damp, and then she would erase it. And so you can see how it just erased the paper up. And here's even a place where it's even peeling a little bit. But the cool thing is that the Arches paper is so thick, it doesn't matter. So, but anyway, you can kind of get a sense of how she erased it back to white, and then she drew it back on top again, and then she would smudge it and do all kinds of stuff, and then she might wet it again and erase it again. And so there's like this history and this layering of things that happen, and these sort of unexpected, unplanned marks that she was able to gather too. So, but this is like a really great example of this project and some of the things that you can do. And each of you will find your own kinds of ways to make marks, and you will erode your drawings in unique ways, which I think will ultimately inform your idea about how you can draw. That you don't have to always draw pristine and clean in a polished way, that you might be able to be a bit more aggressive and experimental. So anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with.